Hey guys, before we get started in this video today, I wanted to mention that we are now a dealer for Skinny Sauce, the good stuff. It's the prep that we always use for every single race. We did a lot of testing a while back of a bunch of different preps that were available at the time, probably 2 years ago. And we found that this one is the most consistent across conditions. So whether it's concrete or asphalt or really cold or really hot, it seemed to be the most consistent. And so since kind of one of my big things is reducing variables, we always use this one. So are there other preps that may be capable of being better in certain scenarios? Possibly, but we like to go with consistency so that we can know exactly what it's going to do on every surface and we don't have to carry multiple preps with us. So that's from our personal testing. That's why we go with it. That's why I would recommend everybody else using it too. So let me know if in the future anybody needs some. Obviously in the Weatherford, Texas area, but if anybody needs some anywhere around DFW, just hit us up, let me know. And obviously if you're nowhere near me, you can still get your hands on some. Just gotta go on Amazon. They sell tons of it daily. Okay, so the first thing, we got the truck on jack stands, and we're gonna test out what's been going on with this rear wheel speed sensor. Remember in one of the other videos, we put a rear wheel speed sensor in there, and first time we went out, the data was really, really rocky. I had the gap really tight, you know, on the tighter side of the range that it recommends, but it still gave me some really jumpy data. So talked to a couple people. It seemed like everybody was using the averaging function. So that's what we're gonna play with. So I'm gonna show you one log of as it sits, averaging one pulse, basically that setting completely set to 0. What you'll see in the graph is a lot of up and downs, even at a steady area. So like if you zoom in and you highlight onto one section, you can see a lot of variations in the signal, even though it's a relatively smooth speed. We notice this just daily driving. If we look at the gauge that is coming up on the dash, that's doing some averaging, and so it's showing a relatively steady signal. That's what kind of made me think that it wasn't a sensor gap issue or sensor wiring issue. It's just a matter of filtering out the data a little bit. It's a little bit too much in a short period of time, and so we're getting these false variations. So now we've introduced some averaging into the settings. So we're averaging 10. I don't expect to really use this data a whole lot really far down low, like 0 to 10 mile an hour. I'm probably not even gonna use. Probably won't even, if we put a front wheel speed sensor on here eventually and we compare the data, I don't think we'll actually use make any changes under 10 mile an hour. So as long as we have pretty decent data and it's not lagging behind, and it's just, you know, nice, smooth data, we can make that work. So this is what it looks like when it's smoothed out. So you'll see the data is just as responsive as it was previously. It doesn't look like it's lazy or anything like that. It's just smoothing out all of those rocky edges that we previously had. I had a hard time holding RPM consistent with no load on it, but it's obvious that it made a pretty big difference. So I think this is what we're going to go with, maybe just a 10 average. I might reduce that average a little bit. More resolution the better, obviously, but if it's giving us rocky stuff, you know, I don't want to average too much, because what my fear is the tiny changes. Like, so if we're on a slick road and we're at the threshold of traction, I'm gonna wanna see those minor differences where it starts breaking loose. I don't wanna lose that completely. I wanna smooth it out, but I don't wanna lose the actual information. So we'll probably try to reduce that average until it starts getting a little bit rocky, because it doesn't need to be, you know, immediately all the way up to 16. Whatever we have to put in there, whatever you have to put into yours to get that signal you know, smooth enough to where it's not jumping around any of your tables, do that. Do minimum amount of smoothing, I would think. But we'll play around with it and see if, you know, maybe there's no difference. Maybe you get it nice and smooth, completely smooth, and everything is fine that way. All right, so the next thing that I wanted to show today was, I've had a couple of questions about traction control setups. Just so that you guys know, on the truck, I do not use any means of traction control. I only just recently put that rear wheel speed sensor in there, and as of right now, I do not use it for anything. I did, however, just set up a table, which I haven't had a chance to test yet because it's raining like crazy right now. Well, I guess it's not raining at the moment, but it's been pretty much pouring off and on all day, so I don't think we're going to be doing any testing today, unfortunately. If it dries up at all, I'll take the truck out. It doesn't have to be good traction to test what I'm trying to test. It actually has to be bad traction. All right, I apologize. This isn't the greatest of setups to look at the screen, but hopefully you guys can actually see what I'm doing here. So first things first, I'll show you the table that I am going to be using, which is let's see here, I don't have it enabled right now. Oh, it's a 2D table. Sorry, it's a 2D table. And it is unfortunately based on time. So it's a timing offset table. This is going to be used for a means of power management. It's going to be time versus RPM. So not the most ideal. What I would like this table to be is versus front wheel speed instead of time. So if in the future I put a front wheel speed sensor on there, which I do plan to, I can still utilize this table, but I would do it by front wheel speed instead of time. What I'm hoping is this table is going to start its time when I release the trans brake. So trans brake launch is disabled. This table is active. One of the things that you want to make sure that you remember to do when you're doing a time-based table is at the end of your time, if you don't want to constantly have a change sitting in there in the background, you need to make sure that your last cell for your time is 0. So once I let go of the trans brake, this thing's going to go through a 2-second progression, and at the end of it, it's going to end up at 0 change to the calibration. You want to make sure that's that way, because the rest of the time that you're driving around, it's going to still be sampling from these cells because trans brake is still disabled. So that's just one thing. You know, every now and then you make some tables and you leave a value in here, and as you're driving around, you're just, you know, driving around with, like, you know, let's say this is let's say you put negative 10 degrees in this area. It's just going to be constantly driving with negative 10 degrees until you reset that trans brake button. So you want to make sure your last cell is always 0. So the purpose of this is supposed to be a table that retards timing pretty drastically. I would have liked for this to have been a limiter to where I can do a roaming limiter. The reason why, for some reason, I don't think Holley can do it. If it can do it, I just haven't figured it out yet. This would essentially be a limiter if I could make it. So instead of it being negative 30 degrees, which is a giant chop in timing, it would be a flat out ignition cut. So what I want to happen here is I want this table to trace the RPM progression over time of a perfect pass. So what I did was I went through and took a look at a log and looked at the RPM rising rate for one of my, you know, good passes. And what this is going to do is, if it veers off of that in that time period, if my RPM and therefore wheel speed increases at too early of a time, it means that's spin. More than likely, it is spin. The only way that it's probably not going to be spin is if I all of a sudden miraculously make way more power and I hook it. Then yeah, it would make a false change in that scenario. But when you have your setup pretty well dialed in and you know the rise of RPM for a good pass, you can use a table like this for consistency. It's not going to make me faster. it's going to make me consistent. I let go of the trans brake button, and within less than 2 seconds, I'm saying RPM is going to go up at this rate. If it goes up at a higher rate, I am assuming that that's spin, and I want to very quickly neck that spin down. And so if it goes higher, it's going to immediately sample a pretty drastic timing retard. And that's going to immediately bring wheel speed back down, and hopefully, or not hopefully, but as soon as it comes up there, let's say it gets a little bit too high at half a second, it's going to get a drastic timing retard, and wheel speed's going to come back down. It's going to come back down into this area that has 0 timing retard. So there's a chance that it could do a little bit, like you could actually hear the RPM kind of go up and down over, you know, the 2 seconds. That's going to be fine, I believe, because all that's going to be is RPM going up and down and wheel speed going up and down, but it's going to be trying to keep it at a wheel speed that I know is ideal for a perfect pass. So it's not the best method in the world, but it's something that I want to try based on what I have. A lot of people don't have wheel speed sensors. This doesn't require a wheel speed sensor at all. So if you have bare minimum information, you at least know that you have a means of rear wheel speed because you have RPM. You're in gear, your engine is engaged with your rear wheels. So as RPM rises, so is wheel speed. So this uses previous data to try to keep the car from doing something drastically different from that. If I overshoot on power, my wheel speed's gonna go drastically up. This table keeps that from happening, hopefully. Now, is it gonna be too much of a timing retard and you know, cause it to be sluggish? Possibly. And I may end up moving that timing retard up a little bit. So instead of it being pretty much one cell and then immediately negative 30 degrees, I may end up changing that to where it's a little bit softer. I'm not sure. I'm curious to see how it reacts. So we'll try that out in the next video. You know, hopefully we'll get some good weather soon so I can go try that out. All right, this next set of tables is another one that I have not tried out on the truck, but this is something that I've tried out on another car. And I just wanted to give you guys an idea of how I prefer to set these up. Right off the bat, you're gonna see the X and the Y axis are speed sensors. So you will need front wheel speed, you will need rear wheel speed for this. And so the difference between this and using that other table that I was just talking about, the other table, if you're doing it by front wheel speed instead of by time, either way that you know, either method that you use, whether it's time or front wheel speed based on what you got, it is a preemptive form of traction control. So you know what a good pass is, and you're making sure that the car traces that. So like 3-step on some other management systems where it's a limiter based setup that changes based on your non-drive wheel speed. That's pretty much what we're trying to duplicate in another table. This table is an actual traction control setup. All right, so this one compares front wheel speed to rear wheel speed and retards timing based on that. The one thing that we do kind of different on this one, and I don't know, maybe some other people do it as well, but we like to get a little bit more resolution than just using one table. And so this one, you'll see the bottom one, the bottom axis is front wheel speed, and that only goes to 100 mile an hour. So we have another table over here that takes care of 100 mile an hour and up. And all this does is allows us to have a little bit better resolution on the changes that we want to make. So you have a below 100 mile an hour table and a above 100 mile an hour table. And the way that we set that up so that it doesn't accidentally make timing corrections from both tables, doubling up. So if you're in this area here and you're spinning a little bit and you're retarding like 5 or 6 degrees or so, and it's also sampling from 100 mile an hour in the other table, it's going to double up. It's going to be 12 mile an hour. So you're going to get this weird lag right in that area where it's transitioning between the two tables. The way that we get rid of that is Holly allows us to set some dependencies of sorts. Using the advanced enable, as long as you have that checked, you can pick from a list of these. We want front wheel speed because we want this to transition from below 100 mile an hour to above 100 mile an hour to the other table. So this table is active below 100 miles an hour. The other table is active above 100 mile an hour. So there won't ever be any overlapping between these two tables stacking up timing changes, which is important. So if you come down here to the table itself, it's pretty basic. You have the bottom axis is front wheel speed, the y-axis is rear wheel speed, and you can just kind of imagine traveling through this. If you're dead hooked, you're going to be going, well, and this table is a little bit weird because I wanted to be able to still make a reasonably large timing change up here. So my scale for this goes to 160, my scale for this goes to 100. So this isn't going to be traveling through completely diagonal across this. It's going to be slightly shallower of a curve. So that's a little bit different. If you want to make a completely basic one that's a little bit easier to understand the concept on, just by looking at it, you can come to this one, which will be completely one-to-one. So this scale goes from 100 to 180, bottom scale goes from 100 to 180. So this, if you're dead hooked going all the way from 100 miles an hour to 180, you're gonna travel right through the middle of this all the way up to this corner. Now, there's a little bit of buffer room because the ideal acceleration isn't dead hooked. You're always gonna have, you know, especially if you're going to be on, you know, crappy surfaces like the street, you're gonna have a little bit of wheel speed. It's kind of ideal to have a little bit of wheel speed all the way through. So you don't wanna make your timing changes to where if you're anything but dead hooked, it's pulling timing. You don't want that. So if you look right here, 105 mile an hour on the front wheel speed scale, it doesn't actually start pulling timing until about 120. So there's a little bit of leeway in there. So ideally you want to be just kind of hovering right above a one-to-one slip, basically. So if we were to do this a different way, we'd make a table that calculated slip ratio, and there is an acceptable slip ratio. We wouldn't want it to be one-to-one, we would want it to be slightly above one-to-one, rear wheel speed to front wheel speed. And so that's what this table allows. It allows a little bit of slip before it starts pulling timing. And you'll see this one is a little bit softer in its timing progression. If you're only a little bit above where we want to be, it's going to pull, you know, and it's going to interpolate between these cells. It's not going to be, as soon as you get into this cell, it's going to pull 7.5 degrees. If you're on the top end of this cell, it's going to pull, you know, 2 or 3. As you creep into it, it's going to do closer to what that cell actually is. Same thing with up here. It's going to progress through these cells and average between all of them as it goes through. So when it's between these two cells, it's going to be averaging 0 and -7.5. So you're going to end up with somewhere in the middle, depending on how close you are to one cell or the other. So that's basically the idea of that. Let me know if you guys have any questions, or if you've got a better idea, by all means, let me know what you guys do for your means of power control, both proactive and reactive means of power control. The other good news is that we got some new tires, finally. I didn't realize how long we had actually been on these old tires. We were almost to the bottom of the indicators. That is the longest I've ever used a set of tires. Got these brand new ones, same size. We use a 2810. I know a lot of guys will use the 2810 5s. Since we do a lot of gnarly surface type stuff, we go with the 2810 because it's available in the DO6 compound. 2810 5s are not actually 10.5, they're 10.3 inches of contact patch, and these are 10, so each tire is only about 0.3 inches larger, but the 10.5s only come in the CO7 compound, which is a significant amount stiffer. So I've always felt that it's, depending on what racing you're doing, sacrificing a little bit of contact patch for the better compound ends up being the better way to go. So that's why we use this Hoosier. Did get a question the other day asking why we use Hoosiers in particular. Every tire that we've used, I've used Mickey Thompson, I've used M&H, a bunch of different sizes of tires too. We've had Mickey Thompsons on this truck. I've had Mickey Thompsons and M&H on previous cars and customer cars. Hoosiers are the only ones that have never leaked. As far as compound goes, I mean, they tend to be pretty consistent all the way until they just flat out stop working well, which is what alerted me to the fact that we've been way too long on these tires. they just completely stop working. I mean, they don't even pick up rocks on the way back, and you pretty much know they're done. So I guess the two things are they hold air with no tubes. You don't require tubes in here. I don't even think Hoosier tells you that you have to use tubes. I would have thought that they'd still tell you to use them just to cover their asses, but they do not leak. That is a huge thing with me when we're going out in the middle of nowhere to race, or we're going at the track and I constantly have to monitor tire pressure to make sure that it's good to go. And if one's leaking and the other one isn't, then you have to like match tire pressure right before you do your run. It's a pain in the ass. I hate having to chase down tire pressure issues. So since we switched over to the Hoosiers, never once had to worry about it. And I keep these tires on year round. The only time I take air out, or the only time I have to add air in, is when I've taken it out. They do not leak. It's wonderful. Little update on the El Camino. It's still got a motor and tranny in it. Tony's pretty much got everything taken off except for the exhaust manifolds. The bolts that hold on the exhaust to them are so rusted we have to probably cut them off. So that's where we stopped last. Next time we work on it, we pretty much should be ready to take it out, and we'll start getting an idea of how the new setup is going to go in there. She's doing really good taking all this stuff off herself. Not much guidance from me. So she's gonna know this thing inside and out more than I do, that's for sure. And that's kind of the way we want it. Her goal for this is she wants it to be, drivable as soon as possible, but we want to make it something where she can drive it to, say Houston, and do some racing out there. Like, she wants to be able to do long drives with this car and go racing. And for the people wondering about the status of the Civic, it is currently sitting in the trailer. We got to get that into the garage here soon. Taking most of the parts that we have for the Civic to do the El Camino quickly. We've said this in videos previously. A lot of people have asked it in the recent videos. I guess they haven't seen the other ones. We are still going to be doing the Civic, but right now the priority is on the El Camino for Tanya. It's going to be a much longer term project than we originally had anticipated. It was going to be a lot more work than we could afford to have somebody else do, and it's a lot more work than we are tooled up to do ourselves. Plus I gotta learn a lot of stuff. So that's the goal for this, be able to do it completely by ourselves, and therefore it's gonna be a pretty long-term project. So there'll be a little bit of updates here and there on that as we go, but it's gonna be pretty slow going because we got a lot of tools to get and skills to learn to be able to finish it up. So that's the update on the Civic. All right, last thing that we're gonna do today is make a bar change. We're actually gonna make a pretty drastic change. It's gonna be, right now, it's probably sitting at around, probably right at 100% anti-squat, so completely neutral, which is where we've had a good amount of luck. I've had it to where it was squatting a little bit. I've never tried a real significant anti-squat value, so we're gonna give that a try right now. The reason why I haven't done that in the past is because I don't have double adjustable shocks in the rear, and so I'm worried that putting a whole lot of anti-squat in it, I'm not gonna be able to control the rate at which it actually shoves the rear end down. I'm worried that it's gonna happen too quickly, and that's going to cause other problems. But I mean, I gotta test it out, give it a try, see what happens. We do have some double adjustables here from the Civic, but those are probably going on the El Camino. But what I can do is use those temporarily, see if I can work it out. If it works really freaking good with a decent amount of anti-squat and those double adjustables, or even on these singles, then maybe I can make the investment of getting some double adjustables for the truck. Wouldn't be too bad, because I'd be able to use the same spring I have now and just get the shocks, and I don't think they're too badly priced. So let me show you what I'm gonna do here in a second, show you where the bars are at right now, and show you where we're going to be moving them to. All right, so these are the front bar locations, and as you can see right now, we're only one hole up on the front of the bottom one, and 3 holes up on the top bar. So, including what is going on the rear, you can see there, we're 1 hole up off of the rear end on the top, and on the very bottom hole on the bottom. So what we are going to do, we're not going to mess with the rear at all. I think that's going to be okay. We're setting this up to specifically help us with street stuff. So I think at the track I would have a slightly different rear bar setup, but for what we're doing right now, I think I'm only gonna mess with the front. We wanna bring that instant center, which is the imaginary intersection point between these two bars being extended out. Right now it's giving us about, I mean, it's a rough calculation, but it's probably about, I'd say 101 at best. It may actually be right at 100. What we're gonna do now is bring this bottom bar up 2 holes. It's a pretty drastic change for that one. Since I don't wanna get, I mean, we would probably be at like 135, 136% if we only did the bottom bar up 2. What we're gonna do is bring that top bar up 1 as well, and that should put us around like 118 or 120, somewhere around there. It's a lot more. It's a good amount more than we've ever run on this truck in the past. So I'm really curious to see how it's gonna work out. So. All right guys, so here is the new position. Hopefully you can see that. So as you'll see, we went up 2 on the bottom and up 1 on the top. And we kept the preload the same in all of them. Because honestly, I haven't really tested anything as to how, like what behavior the preload in certain bars causes. So I keep them completely neutral. All right, so got that all sorted out and everything. Only thing left to do is test it, but we're not gonna be able to do it in this video. So keep an eye out for the next video coming up where we will do some test hits on this, see how that anti-squat setting is going to react and see what kind of shock changes we need to make to cater to that new behavior. We got a lot of tuning to do on this. Everything is going to change if it's as significant of a change as I think it's going to be. So even if it doesn't do good right off the bat, we're gonna try to make sure our shock settings in the rear are as optimum as we can be. We'll try a couple of things with that. Same thing with front shock settings and power control settings, launch RPM stuff. Everything is going to be a little bit different like this. So I'm hoping that it's gonna be better, but we just gotta do some testing and find out. So we'll see you next time. Do me a huge favor and like, share, subscribe, put a bunch of comments. Let me know what you guys think about these settings and what you guys do for your settings. I always like learning from what works for some people. What works for me isn't gonna work for everybody. Keep that in mind, but I'd really like to see what you guys do and how it works for you, what your method is. So anyway, that's it for today. So I will see you next time.